Good morning. This is the Bob Unger Show, and we have with us a very important guest because I'm sure most of you are reading in the news that the Supreme Court said that Joe Biden's attempt to cancel certain student loan debt was not constitutional. And of course, many of you out there may have student loans or have student children or relatives with student loans. And although I'm an attorney, I know no more than you guys know. That's why I have Christie on, because I know, a lot of people don't realize. They think you're a lawyer and therefore you know everything. It's not true. If you're doing one field of law and you've never studied anything in Christie's field, you're certainly not going to know any more than the average person. So, Christie, give us a little bit about your background and then how you got into this field of student loans, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the subject.
Sure. Well, my name is Christie Arkovich, and we specialize in student loan debt relief and bankruptcy and things like that in Tampa, Florida. And I first got into it as a baby lawyer. One of my very first clients was actually the other side, the opposing side, USA Funds. And so I did work running around the state of Florida, actually defending bankruptcy discharges in bankruptcy for Sallie Mae, USA Funds, ECMC, and some others. And back then, I had the belief that people should repay their student loans. I signed a contract. I graduated with a 1-to-1 ratio. Basically, my first job paid about $40,000, and my loans are $45,000. It was fairly easy for me to repay at that ratio. But then I started to see a shift. I started to see folks that had way out of whack ratios, 3-to-1, even 8-to-1 or 10-to-1. So what that would mean is for someone who owes about maybe they make about 100,000 in income from a job, they end up with a student loan of about 400,000. That's a 4-to-1 ratio. We also would see people making 30,000 income, and they would, basically have student loans of 70 or 100 or 150. And it became very difficult for people to repay their student loans with those kinds of ratios. So we started to see that shift. We also started to see servicers weren't really, in my opinion, properly applying different borrowers for different programs that were available. Many of the programs had fatal flaws, that things were not happening as they were intended by Congress. And so we shifted a number of years ago. We've been doing consumer borrower work for well over a decade now, and we deal with federal loans, private student loans as well, in bankruptcy, outside of bankruptcy, pretty much anything student loan related. And so most of our state work is only in Florida because that's where we're licensed to practice. We do federal work, advice and counsel and things, our strategy sessions for nationwide for.
Let me ask you this. Can you explain to our listeners just the basic outline of the type of student loans, and then define what they are, and then we can get into the details?
Sure. So when someone first comes to our office for, we call it a strategy session. Basically, it's a consultation. We first try to identify what loans they have. So we send out something to our clients ahead of time, screenshots to figure out that they can look and run their national student loan database report that shows all their federal loans. So they know how to get that. They know how to send that to us fairly easily. And then we can look at the different types of federal loans, because there are various types. There's older ones called federal family education loans, or FFEL loans. The government is trying to shift folks out of those loans. There's a lot of good programs for direct loans, which are the newer ones now after 2010. And then we also look at the repayment dates, what they've been doing with their loans. And then for private loans, those are not on that federal report. So for those, our clients have usually received phone calls, letters, occasionally it'll be on their credit reports as well. They'll have knowledge as to most, if not all, private loans that they might have signed. And then we look at Parent Plus loans. We look at, has anyone co-signed a private loan? Has anyone taken out a federal loan on your behalf, on the borrower's behalf? And a lot of times we might be talking directly to the parent or grandparent as opposed to the one who actually went to school. And so if we first figure out what all loans exist, And then our job is to figure out, well, what options exist for those loans? Because there's been so many changes in the last basically 3-4 years on student loans, many of the websites, including studentaid.gov, which is the main federal site, in some areas is outdated. And so you might have contradictory information. One common misnomer right now is if you consolidate for a new program called IDR waiver, which is rolling out as we speak. There were letters sent out to, I think it was 89 million borrowers or so last week. Basically, if you consolidate under that program and you do it before the end of the year, you won't lose any prior payment history that you might have had on your loan before that. Normally you would. Normally a consolidation is a brand new loan. It replaces the old loan, so it replaces all the history. And that's significant because let's say someone had 3-4 years in an IDR plan, they don't want to lose that. And so you don't lose that if you do that now, but you would lose that if you consolidated after January. I don't think that's properly really reflected on the government's website. Another common instance is the total and permanent disability plan. We've got a lot of clients who are eligible in their 50s and 60s. They're not able to return to a full-time job doing what they used to do for some reason. And we can frequently get them out on that. Well, they're concerned. What happens if they get better, they take some gig economy type position that allows them more flexibility than their current job later, and they have an income? There's a 3-year monitoring that just ended, but the website doesn't reflect that. It still says that it's ongoing. So we have a lot of clients that are concerned about that. Those final rules are published, but they're not really well known at all. And they went into effect July 1. So we look at all those different things. We look at the changes, and then we meet with our client by Zoom or phone to figure out a path forward, try to reduce that student loan debt as much as we can. What I look at it as, and a lot of our clients say, I have a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe I didn't get rid of all of my loan, but I made the payment much more manageable and I got rid of a lot of it. Even that fixes the client's problem.
And the controversy now with the Supreme Court decision, what loans or which loans did it apply to and which loans did it not apply to?
Sure. So the announcement by the Biden administration that they were going to forgive $10,000 per borrower and up to $20,000 if someone had a Pell Grant applies for those who have federal direct loans or the older federal loans called FEL loans that were basically held by the government now. Not all of them are. Some of them are commercially held. They're actually owned and held by a servicer, and they're only guaranteed by the government. So for that act to have applied, we were recommending to folks, go ahead and consolidate to direct, because then you'll know for sure who owns your loan if you're not sure about looking at the report and how to read it and who owns it and things like that. But it was struck down. And so there were 2 decisions that came out June 30, and they basically made it very clear that the government, or the U.S. Supreme Court, I should say, has no interest in granting universal debt relief for everyone. And I actually think it was the correct decision. I know there's a lot of controversy back and forth. There are folks who side on each side for good reasons. But in my belief, I think that the decision was the Biden versus Nebraska decision, and the other one basically was a wide 6-3 vote, which means to me that it wasn't a close vote, and it was a sign that any future forgiveness decisions by the Biden administration probably will reach the same outcome. In other words, a universal debt relief will not be granted, but it opens the door even more for individualized relief. And that's where I think that focus should be spent anyway, because under that $10,000 policy, you had folks that would be benefited by the repayment of their loans who had the ability to pay their loans. Many loans are grad loans. Many people have good incomes and they're able to pay those grad loans. And so they would have gotten some forgiveness, as well as folks who maybe could not make their loan payments and never will be able to make their loan payments. So instead, the individual relief allows for people who aren't making good income. Maybe they didn't get the benefit of the degree, things like that. Maybe they're older. There's bankruptcy options for them. There's non-bankruptcy options through a new income-driven plan. There's new programs in bankruptcy. We really see bankruptcy as being a sort of a battleground, because some of the laws now have shifted significantly in bankruptcy, and we didn't have those powers before. And then for someone who doesn't want to file, or they're making too much money to file, the new SAVE program is really good. So I know there's controversy on both sides, but I think the individual relief is probably a better outcome than universal. And it was only 10,000. Most of our clients have way over 10,000. So,
10,000 is what they spend on entertainment.
I know it doesn't really matter. I mean, most of our folks that we talk to have over 50,000, and many have, multiple six figures.
Yeah. Believe me, I speak to a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
I remember, you remember the Occupy Wall Street?
Yes.
Okay. I went down there, not as an advocate, but just as an observer. And I spoke to a lot of those people protesting, and the stories that they told me, some of them 400,000 in debt, 500,000 in debt. I mean, insane numbers. And they all had the opinion that somehow, they have it coming to them, this entitlement mentality. My grandfather used to tell me that if a homeless guy is living in a sewer, don't go out and furnish the sewer, because
Right.
he'll never move out. So, and it's true. Make it comfortable for your kid to live in your basement for the rest of his life, and he'll never get out.
Yep.
Make it uncomfortable to be living there.
Yep.
Now, one of the most common things I'm hearing, which to the average person I think is mind-blowing, is I'm speaking to parents who took out what I assume is they don't even know the name of the loans they have.
Right.
I mean, they can't even really tell me what they did. And they're talking about, because their kids are millennials, they're talking about loans they probably took out 13, 14 years ago, because, or maybe even greater, maybe 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the kid is now 30, I think their kids are like 38, 37. So if they took out in their early 20s loans, you're talking about almost 20 years ago. And some of them are telling me, and I've heard this now repeatedly over the last month or so, and I guess I'm more attuned to it because I've been looking at the news a little bit on these issues. They're all telling me that they have a Parent Plus loan of some kind. And one of them, their kids didn't want to go to college. And so they not only took out loans to send them to college, but they took out loans to the most expensive schools like Cornell and University of Michigan or UCLA. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands. And then you have law school on top of that. So they're telling me that few years ago, and this is before the COVID deal, when that came out, they had their Social Security payments garnished.
Mm-hmm.
The government grabbed the Social Security payments, but it only happened a few times. And then after that, they never made a payment again. And they were never contacted again, not even a letter, not even a phone call or any type of collection effort whatsoever.
Did that stop during the pandemic, March 2020, or did it stop beforehand?
I think it was right around the beginning of the COVID.
Yeah.
And ever since, they have never gotten a call or
That's going to change. Yep. And so a lot of people don't know that I like to say that student loans are not just a millennial problem. They affect really all generations. And I think 22% of debt, according to AARP, when I wrote an article for a book recently, or are held by folks that are over the age of 50. And so that's, 1/5 of the loans out there are held by folks that are over 50. And these people should be focused on retirement and, making sure that they have money for their retirement rather than trying to figure out how to repay a student loan. And so we see that as being the next, basically, point that we're going to see a lot of concern over. is these Parent Plus loans. What's going to happen is the payment pause is going to stop here, and payments are going to be due in October. And those folks who have had their Social Security garnished or wages garnished or tax refunds seized, that's going to start again, because those collection efforts are something that the government can do when someone is in default on a federal student loan. I don't know if you knew this, but there's a few different things that the government can do upon default. One is they add 25% to the balance. You know how big that number is?
Yeah.
And we see folks that default more than once because they'll receive communications from a servicer. They've never heard of this party, and all of a sudden they're getting something from them in the mail. There's so many scams out there that they might think it's a scam, so they ignore it and they default again, even if they've maybe corrected the first default. So it happens. But with these Parent Plus loans, interestingly enough, you mentioned that so many of them are old. What I foresee happening is people that are not paying attention. So I really want to thank you, Bob, for both doing this podcast with me and for helping to raise awareness a little bit, because these Parent Plus loans are often the older FFEL loans. They were issued before 2010. 80% of the loans, the federal loans back there, were the older type. And so they need to be changed to the newer direct loans for them to be eligible for this program, this IDR waiver. One of the components, and it's not a pretty name, so nobody really has focused. Before talking today, had you heard of IDR waiver at all?
Never, never.
Okay, yeah, very common response. And so one of the elements of this is that if someone has been making payments or in forbearance, including a COVID forbearance, most deferments will count, but not all. Basically, once someone makes payments for 20 or 25 years, their loan is completely forgiven, whatever the balance is. They might have been on income driven. Maybe they're sending $20 a month because that's all they could afford. They weren't really on any plan at all. We do have some folks that have done that. They've just sent in some amount of money thinking, well, that'll just keep them at bay. I'm getting older. I'm getting closer to retirement. I can't deal with it. I'm just going to pay them $25 a month or something. All those payments will count towards the 20-year forgiveness for undergrad loans. So if they're a student, only went to undergrad, or if they went and got a master's or something like that, then it would be 25 years. And so some of those folks will have already qualified for a discharge. Now, if they don't consolidate, they're not going to get that, right? They're still going to be having a FFEL loan. They're still going to owe $100,000 or more. And come December 31, they're not going to have a chance to try to fix that. One of the other nice things is a lot of people have bifurcated loans. In other words, the parents may have helped the child through undergrad, and then maybe a few years later, they went and got a master's or a PhD or something like that. The interesting thing about this IDR waiver is it will redate all of your loans to the earliest repayment date. So we're seeing folks that might get 4 or 5 years ahead if they go ahead and consolidate now because of that, basically, realignment of all the loans to the first repayment date. So those Parent Plus loans are huge. They're also, they had a higher origination fee. They often have a higher interest rate, 8 to 8.5%. When you have that kind of interest, it's really hard to repay a student loan. And most people with Parent Plus loans, they don't have the career in front of them to actually repay that loan. So we're looking at options of what to do. In consolidation is an important thing, and I'd like to talk about that for just a moment. I've recommended a couple times that people consolidate to direct loans. Sometimes you have to be a little careful in how you do that. We always had a rule that you kept your Parent Plus loans separate in a separate consolidation. And the reason for that is because once you consolidate a Parent Plus loan, you're only eligible for one particular income-driven plan. It's called ICR. It's not that great. It's got a high number. It's a few $100s higher than every other plan out there. Well, the interesting thing with Parent Plus loans is there's kind of a loophole. There's a way that you can actually do a multiple consolidation that you can eliminate the Parent Plus tag so that you're then eligible for a much, much lower payment. It's usually $700 less. It's often under save or repay. So you have to be a little careful with consolidation when you have Parent Plus loans, because there's a certain way you can do it that will save several $100 per month. So I would welcome anyone who's listening. We do a YouTube channel called Student Loan Sidebar. You can find it by Googling Arkovich Law. YouTube comes up right away. And we have a specific video on double consolidation on there. If anyone has further questions about that, we do strategy sessions or consultations. Someone can reach us by info@christiearkovich.com, or our office phone number, if you like phones, is 813-258-2808. Lots of eights. Anyway, so those double consolidation can really help someone, but I would encourage someone to do it this fall so they get the benefit of that other IDR waiver program. If you wait too long, you won't have that option anymore.
Okay, and when they start collecting, let's assume you don't consolidate because
Okay.
you don't know about it, and they weren't lucky enough to meet you. And I just want to say for the viewers, the reason I asked you to do this interview is that every other attorney I spoke to would give out nothing for free. And you're giving a public service on your YouTube and here right now. And that's the way I've always been. I've always helped people without asking for money. And maybe I'm stupid, that could be argued. But when you're an attorney and you are dedicated as you are, you also care about people. And you don't want to be taken advantage of and have somebody just take advantage of your knowledge and never pay you. But on the other hand, you want to give out some information to the public because you are doing what the Jews call a mitzvah, a good deed. And it comes back. It's an interesting thing in life. If you help people, somehow whether you call it God or whether you call it karma, whatever you want to call it, it somehow comes back to you. And the inverse is also true when you do evil things. So I compliment you on your openness and you're willing to exchange ideas. And I've always been the same way. My wife says I do more things for free than what people do for money.
Well, we do have a lot of free materials on our website and YouTube, and we do some podcasts. We do a number of webinars for the ABI, Florida Bar, some other folks. And it's funny because student loans, I've had different practice areas. I've practiced for 30 years now, a little over 30. And student loans is one of the most friendliest practice areas, but it's also the least transparent. It's very hard to figure out what to do with your loans. And you know, it's like a deer in the headlight kind of thing. There's so much information online that sometimes you just don't know what to do. And the contradictory problem is also a big deal. It's very much like when, with our law firm, I once at one point wanted to change billing software, right? I had an antiquated one. I hated it. It took 10 steps to do anything. It was just a pain in the butt. And I would keep researching about it. And there were so many options. It was just like a deer in the headlights. And I never made a decision. So I kept this stupid program longer than I should have before I went to something that was, you know, much more consumer friendly and easy to deal with. And it's the same concept. I'll see folks that they just haven't done the right thing with their student loans because they haven't known what the right thing is to do. And it's kind of a mess. So I am happy that I constantly get notices from folks who have fixed their problem by looking at some of our free resources. And I'm really happy about that. What I don't do is a lot of folks will ask me questions after viewing a video. For that, we use our strategy session. I don't have the time to go back and address individual questions on everybody's loans. And plus, we've got to look at the loans. I can't just willy-nilly just say something without knowing some information about what school they went to and some other things. So that's working.
Very reasonable. Absolutely reasonable. Let me ask you this, just to briefly summarize. Tell us what is going to happen if you consolidate and go into the IDR program. What will happen next? And what will happen next if you don't and you still have the Parent Plus loan?
Okay.
What collection efforts would you expect there to be?
Sure. Well, first of all, if folks don't do anything, what's going to happen is come September 1, they're going to start accruing interest again. During COVID, there's been a pause on the interest. And so someone, if they're at an 8% Parent Plus loan, for instance, that balance is going to grow. So you don't want to ignore it past September 1 because not only are you delinquent, but you're also having accrual of interest. Now, the government, to kind of soften the blow of the U.S. Supreme Court, what they are doing is called an on-ramp process. I like to say a slow start. Basically, what they're doing is for the first year, if someone is delinquent on their federal student loans, and that's 80% of the loans, by the way, that's why one of the things we're talking about a lot is the federal loans. What they're going to do is not refer it to a collection agency, and they're not going to ding someone's credit. So no negative credit reporting for the first year. But the balance is accruing. And so usually someone would be much wiser to go ahead and plan to end this loan through one of the programs that's available. And so SAVE is a new income-driven plan. And it's basically they're replacing repay. They're sort of, most of the provisions of repay are continuing, but this one's going to be quite a bit better because it has additional interest subsidies. It has the ability to file a separate tax return. That's very big because someone might want to exclude their spouse's income. I mean, their spouse didn't go to school. Why should their spouse's income be used to count what the student loan payment is for the borrower? So I'm happy. SAVE has that provision. You can always file a separate return. You can't go back and amend one to separate, but you can address it come January. It also has much better numbers. So in other words, it doesn't have any student loan payment for any income that's below the 225% of poverty level. That's what they count as your expenses. So they don't have any payment for that. And then the payment they do have after that is going to be lower come next July. It'll be 5% for undergrad loans and 10% for grad. That calculation, that percentage doesn't go into effect this time. So you're going to have basically when payments restart here under SAVE, if someone chooses that plan come October, they're going to have a lower payment than what they might have had under repay or IBR or ICR or whatever it is that they might have had. But it's not going to be quite as low as what it will be next July because of the 5-10% thing that they're going to do. And so we anticipate a lot of folks are going to do that SAVE. Anyone who was previously enrolled in repay will automatically be enrolled in SAVE. The interesting thing is the servicers, they were really hit hard by an inspector general's audit a few years back. And that audit said that 61% of the time, the servicers weren't doing what they needed to do. They were doing something wrong. They were miscalculating interest, not advising the borrower of their options, not doing forbearance or the income-driven plans correctly. Very common. In fact, we use that report here in the local district here in Tampa to get our bankruptcy judges to understand what the problems were with the student loan system and that they could address some of this in bankruptcy court, which they did. We started a new program called Student Loan Management Program here in the Middle District of Florida, one of the first ones in the nation. And so there were other judges around the nation that started to inquire and start to be interested in passing something similar, and some states did. But anyway, I digress on that. So folks, I kind of lost my train of thought there. With the federal student loans, where was I going with that? Yeah, I don't know. I remember. If you can edit that out, please. So anyway, so you're going to have folks that they're going to want to get into SAVE, any of the other IDR programs. If they don't, they will be hit with those collection efforts that we mentioned before, the 25% balance increase, the offset of wage garnishments, Social Security, seizure of tax refunds. None of that will occur immediately because of the on-ramp process. There'll be a year delay, but it will occur. And so you're going to have folks come next year, next September, that they're really going to be hit hard. And that will include the regular borrowers as well as Parent Plus borrowers. And that might be grandparents that might have signed on behalf of their child. But there's other programs too. I don't want to just focus on SAVE because there's the Total and Permanent Disability Program. We are filing a lot of those now. There's bankruptcy options with the new IDR. What we're going to see is folks with Parent Plus or grad loans, they may have too big of a payment. And so with that payment size being unaffordable, if they have other options to file a bankruptcy, the new IDR program in bankruptcy will help them. Now, the regs haven't come out on that yet. It just was announced last week, but it's basically going to be, let's say your trustee payment's $100 in a Chapter 13 5-year plan. Well, this is the very first time they're going to allow that trustee payment to count for an IDR, an income-driven payment. That never existed before. So, that's pretty significant. So there's some good options there. And for your listeners, I just realized that some of your folks may not realize what IDR stands for. It's income driven repayment. And basically, instead of a forbearance where the balance just keeps getting bigger and it capitalizes every time it comes off forbearance, IDRs have forgiveness at the end. And so you get on one of those, there's no negative credit reporting, there's no debt collection efforts. You're paying what you can afford under this analysis that I mentioned before. There's a few different plans. SAVE is going to be the major one going forward. And at the end of it, in 20 or 25 years, the balance is forgiven. Now, some of your folks may not care so much about that. Some may be older. Like let's say in 20 years, if you're, I'm 57. So if you're 57 now, in 20 years, you'd be 77, 82 or something by 25 years. If you're starting from scratch, if you're starting from now, you're probably not starting from now. You probably have some time under your belt already. But even so, you might be very close to retirement or actually retired, and not working, maybe for 5 or 10 years before. For those clients, the IDR will continue to go down because their retirement income is going down. And there's ways to contribute to a 401k and a health savings account and things to continue to reduce your income on your tax return to lower your payment further. So we use all these little mechanisms to keep someone's payment fairly low while they're working, lower still while they're not working, and then the loan either dies with them because it's not something that even gets probated. So if someone passes away, the loan is gone, or we get them out on a TPD discharge, a disability discharge.
What about government? Let's say the parent is on a government pension.
Yes.
Is that affected in any way by the money they owe on the Parent Plus loan?
Well, if they receive an income from that, it depends on their tax return, how much adjusted gross income. Sometimes pensions and Social Securities don't fully count as income. Sometimes it's, some counts and some doesn't. So it's whatever your adjusted gross income on your tax return, it's a percentage of that.
I see. Yeah, because a lot of the people I talk to, because of my age, are, retired or on Social Security, and they have no income.
Right.
In fact, some of these people told me that despite owing hundreds of thousands of dollars, they were able to refinance their houses, and it didn't affect it at all.
Well, one of the nice things is it's a system called CAVERS. It's what mortgage underwriters use to determine how much someone might be qualified for a mortgage. During COVID, that report, that CAVERS recognition of a default was eliminated. And so one of the nice things is for someone who's seeking a new mortgage, whether they're refinancing, whether they're downsizing or something like that, they want to make sure that they don't have a default on their record because that would probably prohibit them from doing that. And so one of the things that we do is we suggest someone go into one of these plans, maybe on a temporary basis, just so that their loans are considered current. And the payment can be used to calculate what they can afford by using the IDR rather than just being in forbearance or default. Because if you're in forbearance, the mortgage underwriters will count basically 1% of the principal balance as a monthly payment. And so that often is too high for someone to qualify for the mortgage payment they might want. And in default, they just simply won't get it because they're noted as a default.
Here's a sociological question, but you've got a lot of experience, so you've probably seen this before. As a just a guesstimate on your part, you probably don't have the statistics, but as a guesstimate, how many children who are making good money, even though technically the loan is not in their name, but even though the money was spent on them, how many or what percentage of them, I should say, are helping out and making some of the payments?
I have no idea. I would say probably maybe 20%. And I suspect that the reason for that would be they have their own obligation, their own student loan obligation. Maybe they're saving for a house down payment or they have a house payment. And maybe they have a family and you have the inflationary higher costs of living than what someone that was born earlier would have had, perhaps. they'll probably use that as a rationale to also say that, well, the parent or grandparent will never have to repay the loan. They don't have that much income, so they're not having to pay much on an income driven plan. And so why really should they contribute or pay that student loan if, one, they can't hardly afford it themselves, and two, they think the parent won't actually have to pay it. And then you have the third entitlement aspect that you mentioned earlier. I have mixed feelings about that. I do believe that when someone signs a contract, they should repay the amount. However, I also recognize that a lot of students were very young when they signed these contracts. They didn't know really what the ramifications of it were going to be. And some of the schools would even say, hey, your payment won't be that bad. Your income will easily cover it. You're expected to earn this much, when in reality, that didn't happen. So they were kind of led by the nose. And unfortunately, you have some parents who didn't fully educate them as to what those ramifications could be. And then you also have some parents and grandparents who were asked to sign documents that they never knew what they signed either. They were told, this is something that the borrower, that the student is going to repay. You are just co-signing it when it might be a loan that only they own 100% of. So you have a lot of misinformation basically out there that while I understand the entitlement argument, I also understand the other side, which is once you owe so much money, what's the point? I mean, you're never going to be able to buy a house if you owe $400,000. You're never, if you have a certain rate of interest, you're never going to get that loan repaid. And so I understand that position as well, that there's just no way for them
As
to
an
get
anecdote, when I was graduating high school, I went to the very storied Bronx High School of Science. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was a legendary school in those days. You had to take a special test to get in.
Sure.
And I always joke about it. And I said it was a building filled with the smartest Jewish people I've ever been around. I think I was the dumbest guy in the school. And I had a chance because when you come out of that school, right away, the colleges, especially in those days, looked at you as somebody special. And my dad said to me, you pick out whatever college you want to go to, and I don't care. I'll work 2 jobs. I'll work 3 jobs. And I looked at him and I said, because I knew how hard he worked and how little money he had. And I had what's called rachmanis for him, which means empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Dad, I don't want you working 3 jobs. I don't want you working 2 jobs. I am going to go to City College, and I'm going to go for free, because in those days, it cost nothing other than the books.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't exist anymore, although it's still cheaper than the normal colleges and also the community colleges. I used to sit on the board of directors of a community college, and of course, they're a lot cheaper as well. But if you go to the colleges today, as I've done in years past, they're country clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Their health clubs are fancier than the Equinox, which is a very upscale club here in New York, where only rich people belong, or people who want to live like they're rich. And they turn these colleges literally swimming pools that are gigantic, gyms that are.
That's one of the big problems of the federal loan system. Schools are encouraged to basically enroll as many folks as they can in order to get the money from the student loan. There's a certain eligibility standard and so forth. And I don't really know if the federal government needs to put its hands in there, because no one's looking at the return on investment. I don't usually do advice for people going to college, but the first thing that I would recommend to a family member, for instance, is look at the return on investment. How much are you likely to make from that field that you want to go into, and how much are you paying for that? Is it the right coursework, and is it the right college? Community colleges. I went to a community college for my first 2 years. I graduated
Smart,
from
cheaper, smart.
It's a lot cheaper, yeah. And I graduated from a private law school. So um, there's lots of ways to keep your costs down. And unfortunately, with the schools, you're right. They have big screen TVs in the dorms, and students, they might be enamored by that initially, but really what they want now is they want low student loans. They don't want any of that crap anymore. Maybe they were convinced at one point that they did, but a lot of folks now are waking up to where they don't want that anymore. They're very concerned about what student loans they're signing or their parents are being asked to sign. So the outlook of our country has changed considerably since we've had this discussion about student loans. And I think that's all for for a good outcome, basically.
What year was it that they changed the law? It was quite a while ago to
It was part of the affordable, it was part of the
bankruptcy.
affordable care. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I remember probably 20 years ago, maybe more. They exempted student loans from bankruptcy.
Yeah, so there's been a few legislative changes. In I think it was 87, you had the Bruner standard come out, which is around the country, very similar to the other test, something circumstances, I forget the actual name of it. And it made it so that it was very difficult to discharge student loans in bankruptcy. So since then, there's been a number of other legislative actions. Initially, you could discharge a federal student loan after you'd made repayments for a period of time, like 7 years or so. That was reduced. Now that's eliminated. And then the government really started to take a big position in student loans with the Healthcare Act under President Obama's wing, where it was one of the provisions at the very end that established the new direct loan program. And so now we have, most everybody will do that instead of any other kind of loans. And they have some advantages with the forgiveness, but that doesn't affect everyone. Let's say you're a middle American and the IDR payment is roughly what your standard payment would be. You're probably having to repay that debt that in its entirety, 100% plus interest.
What about people who want to come to you before they get a student loan? I always tell people the best time to see a lawyer is before you have a problem, not after.
Right.
Do you also do that? Do you also advise them on what type of loans they would be best off getting?
We don't often do strategy sessions on that. We will if we are asked. There is a number of things that we have for free on our websites, our website and our blog as well. But we recommend certain types of loans. We explain why it is maybe that you want to do that as opposed to something different and get people structured maybe the right way. There is a bit of a problem with offering advice as to the future, though, because with the government, passing these different programs at different times, sometimes we don't know, what will be the landscape in 10 or 20 years. But right now, there's something called College Scorecard. It's a government offered website, and I really like it because if someone's considering what school to go to, basically it will compare. Here's what the costs are of each school. Here's what the graduation rates are, which is huge, by the way, because a school is not going to tell you that only 50% of their students graduate. Instead, they're going to have pretty brochures and things on the posters and so forth that's going to talk about your possible salary range. But they're not going to say, well, 50% of y'all aren't going to get that because you're never even going to complete your degree. And they also have salary information 10 years after graduation. So I think that's super important because you can weigh what your outcome is as well as what the school is telling you. And it's an independent third party kind of thing. I'm a big fan. I never want to believe just what a college tells me. I want to get information from as many sources as possible and preferably third parties. I don't really care about reviews of what someone thinks right when they get to the school. They might have blinders on, we don't know. Maybe good, maybe bad, I don't know. But we do that sometimes, but not too much. Most of our work, I'd say 95% or more, is dealing with the student loans after someone has tried to deal with them and they just are not getting anywhere. That's the vast majority of our clients.
Well, Christie, I really appreciate you coming on. You were very informative and also doing a public service by giving out this information. I want the audience to know that you're not taking money for this. You're doing it out of a concern to educate people. However, if you listeners out there need a consultation, you just call the Christie Arkovich Law Firm at 813-258-2808. 813-258-2808. And if you're facing the problems that we've been talking about, certainly with the amount of money involved in student loans, it is well worth the consultation fee to speak to somebody who actually knows what they're doing. And I thank you so much, and we will be in touch. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Bob.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.